Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. This is David Bianco. It's November 22nd, and here in the Dallas area, of course, that's a sad reminder of the assassination of John F. Kennedy back in 1963. But one of the things that happened not long after that was the arrival of the Beatles in the United States, which got us out of our funk. And today they are releasing the first titles of the Capitol releases in a box set and individually. I've picked up the Target release of Meet the Beatles, which is on blue vinyl, and I'm going to discuss how it sounds. That's coming up next on the Safe and Sound Texas Audio Excursion. Ironically, on November 22nd, 1963, that same day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated here in Dallas, Texas, in the United States, Parlophone released the second record by the Beatles called With the Beatles. So there was already a second album on the way in the UK for listeners, whereas the first LP for the United States hadn't yet been released. Although the single of I Want to Hold Your Hand came out in late December 1963 and flooded the airwaves at that time, it wasn't until the 20th of January 1964 that we got Meet the Beatles in the U.S. Now, the song tracks on here are different than what were on the British records, and we know that that was kind of a conglomeration that Capitol put together to find what they found were the best songs they thought would sell. And as we know, they sold singles, and flip sides of singles were making it to number one. Really unprecedented things were happening. But this record was, in fact, a very significant entry that really started the British wave here in the United States. Now, this actual work is great on this pressing, although the faces are a little bluish greenish, a little bit darker than the U.S. original. They did a really fine job on this. And what they did also is provided some extras in here. They have what would have been the original inner sleeve with its promotional material and this caution here at the bottom that talks about, to give this record a longer playing life, Capitol recommends duotone. So they wanted to make sure you had a good needle and you were protecting your records from being ruined. So a little bit of commerce going on there as well. So they gave you this, but they didn't put this actual record in here, thank goodness. They put it in a paper with poly sleeve. And this is the bluish color that it is, like a sky blue. It's got a little, when you look at it through the light, a little marbling in the actual record that you don't see on the surface, but it's interior in the pressing. So they put it in a poly sleeve paper sleeve, which is nice. And really nice above and beyond that was this. And this basically is the way the tapes were, what they were written on, how they looked when they used these. There's a little bit of a story in here about the Beatles and some mastering notes on the back. So to me, this is a nice little package, I'll call it. For me, they've given you more than just throwing the record in there and given you some history and treated the record right. So A+ on that effort as it relates to the packaging for the single LP. Now, I didn't order the box. I thought it was excessively priced given the fact that the only difference between the standard albums and the box was the Beatles story, which I'm really not that interested in. The box really didn't give you extras that I could really see. So I decided if I would buy any, I would buy individual ones that I wanted. I started with this one just to hear how it sounded. It was easy to acquire here in the States, just going to the store this morning and picking it up. And so what do? You put it on the turntable and you listen to it. Now, before I begin my review, I have to tell you this bit of history. I was not a big fan of mono. When stereo came out, I thought it was so cool. It was so great. It opened things up. Mono reminded me of AM radio. It reminded me of transistor radios. And it reminded me of kind of a smushed up sound environment to me, whereas stereo gave you more separation to hear things a little more openly. Now, I'll be the first to admit that the stereo work done from an engineering standpoint was sometimes a little crude because it being sometimes four tracks where they had to keep the voices separate from the instruments, and it was a left-right kind of thing, and it wasn't a lot of good mixing that was done given the technology at the time. Stereo was a new thing at the time. As a matter of fact, some of the stereo records they actually charged like $1 more for than the mono versions. It was kind of a new thing. And obviously you'd have to get a new record player set up with 2 speakers and the ability to reproduce a stereo record. Of course, they always told you could play a stereo record on a mono record player, no problem. You just wouldn't get the effect. So there were times I would buy duplicates of records. One of the reasons was the record player I had at the time was not very kind. The needle would tend to cut some grooves while it was playing them as well. And so I would buy several copies often. And I would have a mix of the mono and the stereo. But I would most often like to listen to the stereo. Now, after a while, for me, as time went on and I was able to get hold of some UK versions, obviously they had a very clean sound. They didn't have all this extra reverb and echo and all these things that were done by Capitol early on to really make these things sound hot. And that's what they did. So those were the sentiments of someone who has lived with it and grown up with it. It always reflected more of an AM radio sound to me because, in fact, that was what we listened to at the time a lot. But overall, we knew that, this was Capitol and they were the ones who were putting out the records in the U.S. And it was a while until we really could get our hands on the UK versions of anything into the 70s, in my case at least. So you lived with the Capitol, and that's what you grew up on. But you got to appreciate the validity of the UK stuff when you listened to it because it was so natural, so unabated by these extra add-ons that were put on by Capitol. So it was a different world, not only in the content of what songs were on what albums, but on the way they sounded. So now to go back to getting Capitol record again, that's a little bit of a throwback. And for me, I didn't buy the box because honestly, I thought it was too expensive given the fact that the only add-on was the Beatles story, and I'm not really interested in that. And there weren't really a lot of extra things in it. Other than the collectability of it, I didn't see the value. So I decided I would buy some of these individually. And so today I picked up the Meet the Beatles at Target. Target stores here are selling this blue vinyl copy, and it is only sold there. And it's a very good representation of the way the Beatles sound was at the time. So my audio impressions are, obviously, the vinyl's a little quieter than some of the older copies I have, so that's a natural plus, a little less pops and ticks here and there, although they have their sentimentality. But it seemed like this particular version that just came out now came at you more and really had a little bit of extra oomph. I won't say that the bass was pulled up a lot, but I will say things like the kick drums by Ringo were much more discernible. Some of the cymbals and the work that Ringo did were more obvious in these. It still has the same gushy middle feeling to it that's really got everything clamoring together coming at you. And to be frank, for me, that tends to get a little grating for me over time. It is meant to be played, I think, at a aggressive level, but it just to me is something that can become a little excessive once you've had enough of it. And for me, having enough of it was about one side. So I did a little bit of a delay before I did the second side. But you really, in my mind, you come to realize the deficiencies actually that are in these tapes and the way they were done, and the way they were put together and mixed and delivered to our United States audience. It's very symbolic. It's very nostalgic, but is it very pleasing to say, yeah, this is the one I'd be sitting down and listening to? I don't think so. I think I've been spoiled by the UKs and the German, ones and the ones that don't have all of this done to it. And so, it's more a museum piece, a curiosity. It's cool. But, again, is it something that I say that, yeah, I really want to listen to this in this way? The biggest reason to do it, honestly, is the sequencing of the songs, because you get a recollection in your memory of the way they were sequenced and how you heard it when you listened to it back in the day. And so there's that. And that always is interesting for me because I had to kind of get used to the way the sequencing was of the UKs because they were different. And it threw me off sometimes. I'd expect to hear a different song after I heard one because I was born up on the US versions and that was what my memory had. So now it's going back the other way because I've been listening to the UKs a lot more. So that's an interesting dynamic, I guess, that happens in this experience. If you want to hear more of what's in those originals, I think this does deliver what that intent was. I would tell you what it gives and how much more it is not huge in my estimation. It's not a huge revelation, but there are aspects of it where you do hear things a little better or a little more succinctly than you did in the original. And so it does have that piece of value and interest to it. But at the end of the day, for me, a good discernible stereo version of a UK, for example, and a UK mono is much more what I'm pleased by and really akin to listening to now. And I think this just kind of proved that. So will I buy any more of these? I'm not too sure that I will, to be honest with you. And I'm a big Beatles fan, but I really think this is for those who, want a clean copy and don't want to fight to find one that's older. The extra material in there is really nice. I think that's what I like the most about it for me, actually, is that extra, material of the fold out and what it tells you about. So I think they hit the mark on what they were trying to do. I think you can only squeeze so much out of what was there originally from a sonic standpoint. I'm afraid the die was cast by the way those were mixed in the first place and put together. And so for me, it's an interesting piece of history, and it's something that I think that many can enjoy along with the other ones that come out of records that you enjoy. This was one of my favorites of the ones that was released. I don't know that I'll get any more, though. I'm not just too sure at this point in time. So I think if you're wanting to have a clean copy and you're wondering, does this do the job? I'd say it does. I do have to note on side 2, there is a section there where when it's playing, especially in the dead wax areas between tracks as well, there's a little swish sound. Hadn't cleaned it, so I don't know if I can get it out or not. That was a little annoying on side 2. But side 1 was pretty pristine, actually. Well, my normal numeric comparison for the sounds of this is not going to be in this video because this really isn't an audiophile release in any way, shape, or form. I've tried to describe a few of the things that I thought had more impressionable sound in this, and I think that's the best I can do to give you a ranking, so to speak. So thanks for watching. As always, if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so by clicking on the bell, and a thumbs up or like is appreciated, as are your comments. And so until we catch you next time on the Safe and Sound Texas Audio Excursion, take care, everybody.